My friends, we like to believe that we are free, free in our choices, free in our beliefs, free in our desires. Yet if you look closely, you may see that much of what you call freedom has already been shaped for you, structured by forces you cannot easily see. Michel Foucault once taught us that society maintains its order not through brute force alone, but through subtle systems of discipline, surveillance, and normalization. You do not need a visible chain to remain obedient. You obey because the rules of obedience are already etched into your mind. Carl Jung would have called this a psychic imprisonment, where the collective shadow of society shapes our unconscious, telling us what to fear, what to strive for, and what to repress. We grow into systems that teach us what is acceptable and what is shameful, long before we are conscious of it. And so, most people live as though their lives are freely chosen, when in truth they are carefully guided by powers that prefer obedience over individuality. Look at the schools, the workplaces, the institutions. They are not merely places of learning or labor. They are factories of obedience. You are watched, measured, compared, and disciplined until you internalize the gaze of authority. You learn to regulate yourself, to police your own thoughts, to become your own jailer. What seems like self-control is often society's control working through you. But the deepest danger lies not in the outer rules, but in the way we come to believe that these rules are natural, that they reflect truth itself. We mistake social conditioning for personal identity. We take pride in belonging, even when what we belong to suppresses our individuality. Jung warned us, what is not made conscious appears in our life as fate. If we do not awaken to the invisible structures guiding us, we remain trapped in collective patterns, endlessly repeating roles society has prepared for us. And yet, there is hope, for just as obedience can be internalized, so can freedom. The task is not to reject society outright. That would be naive. But to awaken to its mechanisms, to see how power works through us, and to reclaim the part of the psyche that belongs only to us. Individuation, Jung's great vision, is the process of disentangling your true self from the masks society has placed upon you. The question, then, is not, am I free? The question is, whose voice speaks in me when I decide, when I obey, when I desire? If you discover that it is not your own, then you have already begun the journey toward liberation. The internalization of power is one of the most profound and subtle ways society maintains obedience, and it is precisely this subtlety that makes it so effective. Foucault observed that unlike older forms of power, where kings and rulers relied on visible displays of force, punishment, and coercion, modern societies rarely need whips, chains, or prisons to ensure compliance. Instead, power seeps into the very fabric of our minds. We carry it within us, often unknowingly, regulating our own thoughts, emotions, and behaviors according to the invisible standards imposed upon us. What once required external policing has been replaced by self-policing. This process begins early. In childhood, we are taught the rules of conduct, how to sit, how to speak, how to listen, how to defer to authority. Discipline is reinforced not just by punishment, but by praise when we conform. The lessons may seem harmless, but over time they create a deeply ingrained reflex to seek approval and avoid disapproval, to follow norms without questioning their origin. By the time we reach adulthood, we rarely need an external authority to remind us to obey. The rules are already inside us, operating silently. We become, in Foucault's words, docile bodies, shaped not by force, but by training and repetition. Carl Jung would explain this process as the colonization of the psyche by the collective. When we adopt society's expectations without reflection, we internalize its collective shadow, its prejudices, fears, and repressions, without realizing it. We may believe our choices are our own, yet many of them are decisions made to fit into molds handed to us. We dress, speak, study, and even dream within the boundaries of what society has already sanctioned as acceptable. The tragedy is that this obedience does not feel forced. It feels natural. We mistake adaptation for freedom. This internalization of power is nowhere more evident than in the way we censor ourselves. Consider how often people silence their own thoughts for fear of being judged, excluded, or labeled abnormal. Even when no authority figure is present, the imagined gaze of society lingers. We act as if someone is always watching. And in a way, someone is. The image of the collective has been etched into our psyche. We have absorbed the authority so deeply that we become our own overseer, our own warden, our own judge. The danger here lies in the unconsciousness of the process. If you are aware that a prison exists, you can find a way to escape it. But when the prison is invisible, when it has been built inside your mind, escape becomes much more difficult. You may go through life believing you are free, while every decision you make bends toward obedience. Jung would warn that this is a betrayal of the self, the deeper truth within us that longs for individuation, for authentic expression beyond collective molds. To recognize the internalization of power is to take the first step toward freedom. It is to pause and ask, are these my beliefs, or are they beliefs society placed in me? Are these my desires, or are they desires carefully shaped to keep me in line? It is not an easy process, for it requires the courage to confront both Foucault's invisible mechanisms of discipline and Jung's darker insight into the ways the collective unconsciously shapes us. But without this awareness, obedience remains hidden, and the soul remains confined in a cage it cannot see. The normalization process is one of the most insidious ways society keeps individuals obedient, because it does not appear as control at all. It appears as guidance, as order, as the natural way things should be. Michel Foucault pointed out that power does not simply punish disobedience, it shapes standards of what counts as normal. Once a standard of normality is established, anything outside it is marked as deviant, abnormal, or even dangerous. People, wanting acceptance and fearing exclusion, internalize these standards and begin disciplining themselves to fit into the mold. In this way, society does not merely regulate behavior, it manufactures identities. Consider how early this begins. From the moment a child enters school, they are measured against the average. Grades, test scores, behaviors, all are compared to a standard of normal performance. Those who meet the standard are praised, those who fall outside are corrected, punished, or marginalized. The message is clear: you must conform to what is considered normal, or risk being labeled as deficient. By the time the child grows into an adult, they have already learned that belonging and survival depend on alignment with these norms. No chains or whips are necessary. The individual has become their own enforcer. Carl Jung would recognize in this process a deep psychic cost. The drive to conform suppresses individuality, forcing people to repress the unique aspects of their psyche that do not fit societal expectations. Jung's concept of the shadow is crucial here. Much of what society rejects, creativity that challenges authority, unconventional desires, ways of thinking that disturb the status quo, becomes relegated to the unconscious as shadow material. People learn to hide or deny parts of themselves not because those parts are wrong in themselves, but because they fall outside the approved definition of normal. Thus, normalization becomes a collective repression, silencing not only individuals but entire dimensions of human potential. The tragedy of normalization is that it feels invisible. People rarely stop to question why certain behaviors are considered normal while others are stigmatized. Why should working long hours be considered virtuous, while taking time for introspection is labeled lazy? Why should wealth be celebrated as success, while solitude or creative freedom is dismissed as eccentricity? These definitions are not neutral. They serve the interests of power, ensuring that people strive to maintain systems that benefit authority while calling it normal life. The danger of ignoring this red flag is that you live a life scripted by norms rather than by your own truth. You may choose a career, a lifestyle, or even a partner not because they align with your authentic self, but because they match what is socially rewarded. Over time, this obedience to normalization can create a deep sense of emptiness, because the inner self has been sacrificed to the mask of conformity. Jung would argue that this is the very opposite of individuation. Individuation requires us to embrace our uniqueness, to integrate the shadow, and to live authentically, even when it contradicts collective expectations. To recognize the normalization process is to reclaim freedom. It is to pause and ask, who defined this standard of normality, and why should I accept it? Is my longing for security worth the price of losing my individuality? By making the unconscious influence of normalization conscious, you begin to step outside the invisible current pulling you toward conformity. You begin to live not as society's obedient subject, but as your own authentic self. Surveillance and the invisible gaze are among the most powerful tools society uses to keep us obedient, and they are effective precisely because they no longer require an external presence to function. Michel Foucault described this brilliantly through his idea of the panopticon, a prison design where inmates never know when they are being watched, so they assume they are always under surveillance. The genius of this system is that it no longer requires constant guards. The prisoners regulate themselves out of fear of being seen. Modern society has taken this principle and woven it into almost every aspect of life. You need not be watched directly, because the possibility of being watched is enough to ensure compliance. Think of how this plays out today. Cameras in public spaces, the tracking of digital data, the constant sharing of personal information on social media. These all create an environment where people feel that they are always visible. Even in the absence of explicit control, the awareness of being observed subtly alters behavior. People speak differently, dress differently, act differently when they know they are seen, and eventually this awareness becomes internalized. Even when no one is present, we carry within us the imagined gaze of others. We adjust ourselves not because someone tells us to, but because we have learned to watch ourselves through the eyes of society. Carl Jung would recognize this as a psychic split. The self is sacrificed to the persona. The persona is the mask we wear to present ourselves acceptably to the world, and under constant surveillance, this mask becomes dominant. We begin to confuse the mask with who we truly are. The invisible gaze ensures that we do not act spontaneously from our depths, but carefully perform according to what will be accepted, admired, or at least tolerated. Surveillance, then, is not only external, it enters the soul. It becomes an inner censor, cutting us off from authenticity. The danger of ignoring this red flag is profound. When we are constantly under surveillance, real or imagined, we lose touch with our own inner compass. Decisions are no longer made based on inner truth, but on how they will be perceived. Success becomes about appearances, morality becomes about reputation, and individuality becomes buried under the pressure to conform to the gaze. You begin to live not as yourself, but as an actor on a stage where the audience is always watching. The worst part is that this audience is often imagined, a construct of your own mind. You have become both the performer and the judge, the watched and the watcher. Foucault warned that this invisible gaze is one of the most efficient forms of control because it requires no chains and no overseer. It thrives on self-surveillance. Jung would add that the cost of this self-surveillance is psychic fragmentation, the disconnection from the self, from spontaneity, and from deeper truths of the unconscious. A life lived under the gaze is not truly lived at all, it is performed. To awaken to this mechanism is not easy, for the gaze feels omnipresent, but awareness itself is the beginning of freedom. To notice when you are acting for the eyes of others rather than from your authentic self is to begin to reclaim your inner life. The goal is not to escape all surveillance, that may be impossible, but to recognize that your truest value cannot be measured by external eyes. When you realize this, you begin to step out of the invisible prison, not by tearing down walls, but by refusing to mistake the gaze for truth. Language as a tool of control is one of the most overlooked yet powerful mechanisms through which society keeps individuals obedient. Michel Foucault emphasized that power is not only exercised through laws, institutions, or surveillance, but also through discourse, the way we speak, the concepts we use, and the categories that define reality. Words are never neutral. They carry embedded assumptions that shape how we think, what we perceive as possible, and what we dismiss as unthinkable. By shaping language, society shapes thought, and by shaping thought, it maintains obedience. Consider how language frames success and failure. To be successful in modern society often means accumulating wealth, status, or recognition. This definition is not natural. It is socially constructed, reinforced through schools, media, and culture. People who choose a different path, perhaps one of simplicity, creativity, or inner exploration, may be described as unambitious or irresponsible. The labels carry weight, and they steer individuals toward conformity. Language in this way becomes an invisible compass, pointing everyone in the same direction, even when their inner truth longs to go elsewhere. Jung would say that such language limits individuation by cutting off contact with deeper aspects of the psyche. Words define not only what we can say, but what we can even imagine. If your culture has no language for inner wholeness, for the soul's calling, or for the process of integrating the shadow, you may not even realize that these dimensions of life exist. Instead, you live within a narrow linguistic prison, confined by definitions handed down by authority. To go beyond these definitions feels almost impossible, because it requires breaking free from the very words you use to think. The control of language is also evident in how society stigmatizes dissent. People who question dominant narratives are often labeled radical, dangerous, or irrational. These labels act as barriers, discouraging individuals from thinking critically or expressing alternative views. The moment you are placed outside the accepted discourse, you risk exclusion. The fear of being labeled keeps many obedient, silently aligning themselves with the majority, even when their inner voice whispers otherwise. This is how language disciplines thought, not with force, but with subtle boundaries that define what is respectable, sane, or acceptable. The danger of ignoring this mechanism is that we mistake society's categories for truth. We may believe that success, morality, sanity, or even love must be defined in narrow, prescribed ways. As a result, people suppress their authentic desires, mistrust their inner experiences, and reshape themselves to fit into linguistic boxes that were never meant to hold the fullness of human life. Jung would argue that this cuts us off from the deeper archetypal layers of the psyche, where symbols and images transcend the rigid categories of everyday language. Individuation requires moving beyond the prison of words, reconnecting with symbols, myths, and inner images that point to truth society cannot capture with language alone. To awaken to this form of control is to become attentive to the words you use and the meanings you accept. Ask yourself, who defined these terms, what assumptions lie hidden within them, and most importantly, do they reflect my authentic truth, or do they merely reflect society's desire for obedience? By reclaiming language, by redefining success, freedom, love, and even sanity in your own terms, you begin to loosen the grip of societal discourse. You step outside the boundaries of obedience and into the expansive field of your own becoming. The collective shadow is one of the deepest insights Carl Jung offered into how societies maintain order and obedience. Just as individuals repress aspects of themselves they do not want to face, anger, envy, fear, or desire, so too does society repress qualities that threaten its stability. These disowned aspects do not simply disappear. They are projected outward, cast onto individuals or groups, who then become scapegoats. In this way, society convinces itself that it is pure, orderly, and moral, while secretly hiding its own shadow in the margins of human life. This mechanism not only sustains obedience, but also shapes the boundaries of what is considered acceptable, forcing individuals to conform or risk being pushed into the role of the outcast. From childhood, we are subtly taught what parts of ourselves are acceptable and what must be hidden. The child who expresses too much anger is told to calm down. The one who shows too much imagination may be told to focus on reality. And the one who questions authority may be labeled disruptive. These lessons reflect not only family preferences but societal expectations. Slowly, each of us learns to bury aspects of our nature to remain safe and accepted. But what is repressed in the individual mirrors what is repressed collectively. Whole societies push away traits that would disrupt their structure: sexuality, vulnerability, dissent, and nonconformity. These rejected aspects do not vanish. They reappear in the stereotypes, stigmas, and punishments placed upon others. This projection of the collective shadow is a powerful means of control. When society labels certain groups as lazy, immoral, dangerous, or insane, it creates a clear warning: do not behave like them, or you will be cast out too. Obedience is reinforced not through direct punishment, but through fear of being associated with what society despises. The individual, longing for belonging, suppresses those very same qualities within themselves to avoid shame and exclusion. The result is conformity, not because of laws or surveillance, but because of the terror of carrying society's projected shadow. Foucault's insights connect here. Power operates not only by restricting bodies but by defining categories: what is sane and insane, healthy and unhealthy, moral and immoral. These categories are not neutral. They are instruments of control that keep people obedient by dividing them into normal and abnormal. Jung would add that this division is ultimately psychological. What is denied by society still lives in the unconscious of its members. When we conform to escape society's judgment, we are not only avoiding outer punishment, but also repressing inner truths. The danger of ignoring this mechanism is that you become a carrier of society's repression. You live in fear of your own shadow, silencing your impulses, censoring your creativity, and shrinking from authenticity. Worse still, you may unconsciously participate in projecting the collective shadow onto others, judging and condemning those who live outside the boundaries society has set. This is how obedience perpetuates itself. The oppressed become the enforcers, each person carrying the fear of exclusion within and turning it against others. True freedom requires confronting the collective shadow. Jung believed that individuation demands we integrate what society has taught us to reject, reclaiming our wholeness even at the risk of standing outside the norm. To face the collective shadow is to recognize that what society calls abnormal often contains suppressed truths, energies, and wisdom. The artist, the rebel, the mystic, and even the outcast embody parts of humanity's society cannot yet accept. By acknowledging these dimensions within ourselves, we weaken the grip of obedience. To awaken here is to see clearly. What society represses is not always evil or dangerous. It is often the very material of human growth. By facing the collective shadow instead of projecting it, you step out of the prison of conformity and into the possibility of becoming fully human. The illusion of freedom is perhaps one of the most sophisticated ways society keeps individuals obedient, and it works precisely because it does not feel like control. Unlike chains, laws, or overt punishments, the illusion of freedom convinces us that we are choosing our own path, when in reality, our desires and options have already been shaped by invisible forces. Michel Foucault observed that modern power does not simply forbid, it produces. It produces categories of thought, norms of behavior, and even desires themselves. What feels like a free choice is often nothing more than the internalization of what society has told us we should want. Think about the way freedom is commonly defined in modern life. We are told we are free because we can choose what to buy, where to work, what to watch, and how to present ourselves. Yet these choices are structured by powerful forces: advertising, media, education, cultural traditions, and economic systems. For example, you may feel free when you purchase a new phone, but your desire for that phone was carefully cultivated through marketing strategies that made you believe your identity, status, or happiness depends on it. The freedom to choose between brands or lifestyles is not true freedom. It is consumer freedom, where the boundaries of choice are already predetermined. Carl Jung would frame this as a psychological trap. If your desires are conditioned by external forces, then the self, the true inner core of who you are, is not what is guiding you. Instead, it is the persona, the mask adapted to social expectations, that makes decisions. You believe you are exercising freedom, but in truth, you are obeying the values and ideals society has implanted in you. This creates a dangerous split. You appear to be free, yet internally you are alienated from your authentic self. The illusion of freedom also extends to larger areas of life: career, relationships, morality. Society tells us what it means to live a good life: secure a stable job, build wealth, start a family, retire comfortably. These paths are not inherently wrong, but the problem is that they are presented as universal truths rather than cultural constructs. If someone deviates, choosing solitude, creativity, or spiritual pursuit, they are often seen as failures or misfits. Thus, the illusion of freedom pressures individuals to conform, even while telling them they are free to choose. The result is a life lived according to scripts rather than genuine self-discovery. The danger of ignoring this mechanism is that you mistake conformity for self-expression. You think you are fulfilling your dreams, but in reality, you are fulfilling society's expectations dressed up as your own. This leads to a quiet despair, the feeling that even after achieving what you were told to want, success, recognition, material comfort, something is missing. That missing piece is the self, the unconditioned core that has been drowned out by external noise. To awaken from this illusion requires deep self-examination. Jung's process of individuation invites us to strip away the layers of conditioned desires and to listen to the unconscious, where authentic symbols, dreams, and intuitions emerge. Foucault's warning pushes us further. We must question not only our desires but the systems that produce them. Ask yourself, who benefits from the choices I think I am making? Are my longings truly mine, or have they been planted in me? The moment you ask such questions, the illusion begins to weaken. True freedom is not the endless ability to choose within predetermined boundaries, but the courage to step outside those boundaries altogether. It is the recognition that your worth does not come from how well you fit into society's version of success, but from how authentically you live in alignment with your deeper self. Only then does obedience lose its grip, because you are no longer bound by the illusion. You are guided by something real within. ChatGPT said, breaking free from society's mechanisms of obedience begins with something deceptively simple: awareness. Yet this awareness is not merely intellectual, it is psychological, existential, and deeply transformative. Michel Foucault believed that power works most effectively when it is invisible, when people do not even recognize they are being shaped. Carl Jung would add that what remains unconscious rules us from the shadows. Thus, the first act of resistance is to name the forces that have conditioned our thoughts, desires, and identities. This awareness often begins with discomfort, the subtle realization that much of what we take as normal is not natural at all, but constructed. The way we measure success, the way we define morality, the way we structure time, even the way we speak, these are not universal truths, but systems created by culture to maintain order. When you start to see them as constructs rather than absolutes, a space opens within you. You realize that obedience is not inevitable, and that you have the possibility, however fragile, of choosing differently. But awareness alone is not enough. Foucault's insight reminds us that power is not something we can simply step outside of. It is woven into every part of our existence. This is where Jung's psychology provides another layer. Awareness must be joined with individuation, the process of integrating the unconscious, reclaiming the shadow, and living from the authentic self rather than the socially conditioned persona. Critical reflection becomes not only about analyzing the world outside, but also about uncovering the hidden ways we have internalized society's gaze within ourselves. Consider the ways you censor your own thoughts before speaking, the times you silence your desires because they do not align with what others expect, the moments you feel shame not because you have done something wrong, but because you fear judgment. Each of these is a sign of obedience living inside you. Critical reflection requires courage to examine these patterns and ask, whose voice is speaking in my mind? Is it my own or society's internalized authority? The act of resistance, then, is not necessarily dramatic rebellion, but a subtle reorientation of the soul. It means reclaiming language, refusing to let society define success, love, or freedom for you. It means embracing the parts of yourself society has labeled unacceptable, the shadow energies that, once integrated, give you strength and authenticity. It means questioning desires, not blindly following them, and asking whether they arise from your deeper self or from conditioned programming. Resistance is lived in choices, choosing authenticity over conformity, inner truth over external approval, and self-knowledge over blind obedience. The danger of ignoring this path is clear. Without awareness and reflection, we live as passive participants in systems that shape us. We may achieve what society calls success, yet feel hollow, because our lives were never truly ours. But the reward of awakening is profound, the discovery of inner freedom that cannot be taken away, even in the face of external control. Breaking free does not mean escaping society entirely. It may not even be possible. What it does mean is refusing to confuse obedience with authenticity. It means becoming aware of the invisible strings and, even while living among them, choosing to dance to a rhythm that comes from within. In this sense, awareness and reflection are not only acts of resistance. They are acts of becoming fully human.